Hello, everyone. Today's climate project topic is Sweden. So, Sweden, by many measures, represents a best case scenario for an industrialized country. It's also an excellent illustration of why projects often spend 90% of their effort on the last 10% of performance improvement. Sweden has a lot to recommend it in many ways. By any measure, its overall emissions are low, and its carbon intensity is also relatively low. And this is for a developed economy that includes some manufacturing. This is largely due to its heavy use of hydro and nuclear power. So it's tempting right now to just stop and say, here, let's all model ourselves after Sweden. But Sweden is not net zero. So let's dig a bit deeper into these numbers to see the difficulties involved with going further still. So, looking at the overall numbers, two items jump out. On the emission side, they still have some significant transportation emissions, and they also give themselves a large credit for land use. Going to tackle that a little further on. So, let's take a look at transportation to start with. Transportation, the key is going to be about what to do about trucking and adoption rate for electric vehicles. Looking at current trends, emissions are dropping for transportation by about 3% per year. The takeaway is that improvement is not rapid. This is further complicated by growth rates in vehicle ownership and the economy at large. As a reminder from other videos, and if economy grows by 3% and drops its emissions by 3% annually, net emissions will likely stay constant. That's that last 10% of performance problem. Turning to land use, the entire calculation for land use is a little murky to me. It's basically giving credit for increasing carbon sinks, such as trees and such. Natural carbon capture, if you will. And conceptually, it's a good idea, trying to motivate the right thing. The devil is in the detail of how it's calculated, and that's tougher than one might imagine and definitely varies by location. Adding this is to the question of net impacts versus a country level. Our old growth forests preserved by Sweden simply cut down in other locations. This is important because, in a sense, it's part of the whole carbon capture discussion. And if Sweden's forests started to die off because of higher temperatures in the future or fires, will that eliminate all the credits being taken today? When doing the math for a country like Sweden, this is important. Take away the emissions credit, and while the carbon intensity of Sweden is still good and better than most, it starts to become more like a France in its scoring. From my readings to date on the subject of land use, the opportunity for countries to play games with the numbers when making these land use calculations is considerable. Not that things like that ever happen, and that's sarcasm, in case you couldn't guess. There are topics that I review that have pretty cut and dry numbers, the electrical grid, for example. Others are estimates that allow for decision making for a project manager with the understanding that there's uncertainty as to the final outcomes. Electric vehicles, for instance. Land use falls in the conceptual bucket, a reasonable assumption with a huge emphasis on assume. It's both an opportunity and a risk, which is probably worthy of a video on risk management. From a project management perspective, Sweden is something of a best case scenario for carbon intensity, as discussed earlier. This is a very important benchmark. On the good news side, Sweden demonstrates that with proper management of energy resources, using existing technologies, emissions can drop significantly. So let me emphasize existing technologies. It's also a cautionary tale, right, Roosevelt? Hmm? Roosevelt? A cautionary tale that last 10% of performance is usually 90% of the effort. The reasons for the strong performance to date is geography and a good political system. Targeting Sweden's CI, carbon intensity, is a realistic expectation for 2050 goals for countries around the world. Though, given many countries' current performance, that may be a stretch goal in many cases. So, Sweden and a few other countries are also excellent test cases to see what succeeds and what fails going forward. So, hopefully, other countries can learn. With that, I thank you for your time and look forward to talking to you soon. Bye bye.